There is a particular kind of person who, when the news turns dark, feels something they cannot quite name, a strange relief almost, as if the catastrophe outside is finally catching up to something they have been carrying alone. You know the type, because at one time or another you may have been the type. They do not panic in the ordinary way. They do not turn the news off. They turn it up. They find themselves gravitating with an almost shameful appetite toward the worst of it, toward the collapse scenarios, the flood projections, the think pieces about the end of the current order. They stay awake past midnight, reading about infrastructural fragility, about the mathematics of civilizational failure. And the strange thing is that this does not feel like anxiety exactly. It feels, in some obscure and unreasonable way, like recognition. They cannot explain this. If you pressed them, they would say they are just staying informed. They would say the fear is rational. The world is genuinely precarious. You cannot argue with that. But then why do they feel, when they read about the breaking point of something, not more frightened, but almost more themselves? Why does the vision of collapse feel against all reason like a homecoming? There is a part of you, the part of you that runs the machinery below the floor, that you feel through its vibrations, rather than through any clear sight of its workings. You know it is running because things hum and shake in ways you did not choose and cannot stop. That underground machinery has its own weather. It has its own pressure systems, its own fronts moving in from directions you do not consciously track. And when the world outside throws up imagery that matches that inner weather, floods, fires, the crumbling of structures that were supposed to last, something in you goes very quiet and then very attentive. Not because you want the world to end, but because the world outside has, for a moment, spoken in the language of something inside you that has been trying to speak for a long time. The question this raises is not a comfortable one. It is not, is the world going to end? It is a different question, harder and closer to home. If the imagery of catastrophe resonates in you with the force of something personal, if the flooding river, the collapsing institution, the age that cannot hold itself together, all feel somehow familiar and somehow true, then what exactly is collapsing? What age is ending, not out there but here? The answer starts with a mechanism so ordinary that it is easy to miss. There is a process the inner life performs constantly, automatically, without asking permission. The way the eye adjusts to sudden light before you decide to squint. It is the act of taking something that belongs to you and placing it outside yourself so that you can see it at a distance rather than feel it up close. A psychologist would call it projection, like a film projector casting what's inside you onto the screen of the world. The image is yours. The screen is not. The person staying up past midnight reading about civilizational collapse is not studying the world. They are watching themselves. The floods are their own. The crumbling structures are ones they recognize from the inside. The imagery is seizing them because it is accurate. It is a true report of something happening in their own inner life. But the inner life, rather than presenting this directly, which would require sitting with it, naming it, feeling the full weight of it, has outsourced the whole drama to the news cycle, to history, to the sky above the city. The catastrophe is real. It just has the wrong address. This is not a personal failure or a quirk of temperament. It is a feature of how the inner life is built. Beneath the part of you that plans and decides and worries about what to say in meetings, there is a much larger and older machinery that does not communicate in words or arguments. It communicates in images, in feelings that arrive without explanation, in the sudden sense that something is about to break. This deeper part does not belong only to you. It is the layer of the inner life that belongs not to any single person, but to the species, the ancient basement all human minds share, stocked with patterns older than language. And it responds to the shape of things, not the content. When it senses that something is disintegrating, an old identity, a worldview, a set of certainties that has been losing its hold for years, it reaches for the most dramatic available imagery to name what it feels. And in an age of 24-hour catastrophe coverage, the imagery is right there, inexhaustible, fully formed. When the deeper inner life is activated this way, It does not present its concerns politely. It fires. It produces what amounts to an independent emotional presence, a pocket of feeling that is broken loose from your own management, that does not ask permission before it drags your attention across the room. You find yourself reading the collapse thread again, even though you told yourself you would stop. You find yourself watching the disaster film a second time, not because you enjoy it, but because something in you needs to see it through, needs to feel to the bottom of something. That is not curiosity. That is a charge in the inner life that has become autonomous. It runs on its own, and the only way it can discharge itself is through the imagery that triggered it. And what is that charge actually carrying? This is the question that changes everything. Because beneath the grip of apocalyptic content, almost always, there is a shadow. The parts of yourself you could not afford to look at, the rage you could not express, the helplessness you could not admit to, the despair about your own life that you have been keeping bundled out of sight behind a door you have kept firmly shut. The end-of-the-world content gives that shadow a costume. Suddenly, the things you cannot face in yourself are wearing the face of geopolitics, of climate data, of the inevitability of systemic failure. They are no longer your private darkness. They are civilizations. That is the strange relief. When the catastrophe is out there, you do not have to feel it in here. You can study it, analyze it, prepare for it. You can be righteous about it. What you cannot do, as long as you keep the projector running, is feel what it is actually telling you about what is dying inside your own life, in your own particular and unrepeatable circumstances. The imagery is accurate. Something is ending. But the question that this understanding forces open, what exactly is dying inside you, is the one worth staying with. What is dying is an age, not a metaphor for decline, not a vague sense that things are worse than they used to be, but something with real structural weight, the collapse of a set of inner certainties that once held the whole architecture of a life in place. To understand how this works, it helps to look at a period in history when the same mechanism operated on a scale large enough to see from the outside. 2,000 years ago, the most powerful civilization the Western world had produced began to come apart. The Roman Empire did not fail because of military defeat alone or economic exhaustion alone. It failed because the inner life of the civilization had fractured, political confidence in one direction, spiritual hunger in another, the arts retreating, the old values losing their ability to move people. It had become, if you reduced it to a single person, someone who had mastered every external skill and then forgotten what he was for. He was brilliant at the surface and hollow underneath. The political structures still ran, the roads still functioned. But something that had once held the whole thing together from the inside, a felt sense of purpose, a set of symbols that could still produce awe and orientation, had quietly stopped working. That is the fracturing of the inner life into sections that no longer talk to each other. The way a civilization, or a person, can be brilliant on the surface and rotting underneath at the same time. And what happened at the center of that disintegration? Something new was born. Not announced, not planned, barely noticed by anyone living through it. A few people gathering in rooms, a story about a figure who rose from the sea of human suffering and spoke in images the deeper layers of the mind could recognize. The fish, the bread, the wine, the grain that dies to feed the world. What broke into that collapse was not another political solution. It was a symbol powerful enough to gather the scattered energy of an age. And the symbol characteristically carried both the ending and the beginning inside it. The Pisces constellation, two fish swimming in opposite directions, was already the ancient astronomical marker for the age then opening, one fish pointing toward the darkness it was leaving, one fish moving toward what had not yet arrived. The end of an aeon is always also a new beginning. The 12th sign is always the one that holds the ending and the first turning together. The mechanism is the same in the individual. When the symbols that once held your inner world in place lose their power, the career that was supposed to give life meaning, the relationship that was supposed to make everything make sense, the worldview that was supposed to organize experience into something navigable, The energy that flowed through those containers does not disappear. It goes underground. And the inner life's built-in counterweight begins to move. When consciousness leans too far in one direction, something beneath starts quietly pushing the other way, generating dreams, generating obsessions, generating the sudden grip of apocalyptic imagery that bypasses all your rational filters and seizes you at 3 in the morning. That energy, uncontained, looks for the largest available vessel. In an individual whose old structures are failing, it reaches for imagery that matches the scale of what is collapsing. The person does not think, my career identity is disintegrating, and therefore I will watch a film about flooding cities. It does not work that way. What happens is that the imagery of civilizational collapse has the same emotional signature as the interior collapse, the same vastness, the same sense of something irreversible in motion, the same grief that cannot yet name itself. The inner life recognizes itself in the outer image, and that recognition, however painful, is also a relief. Because the catastrophe, however enormous, at least has a shape. At least it can be watched. This is why the apocalyptic pull does not feel like ordinary anxiety. Ordinary anxiety is about a specific, manageable threat. The pull of end times imagery is about something that has grown too large to look at directly, an ending so comprehensive that it cannot be held in the personal scale at all. John on the island of Patmos, writing the most devastating apocalyptic vision in the Western tradition, was not having a personal crisis of temper. The visions that broke through him came from a depth far beyond any individual's private history, from the collective and archetypal material of his entire age, pressing for expression through the only available vessel. He saw the ending not as something happening to him alone, but as the inevitable reversal of everything that had been pushed too far in one direction, the flip to the opposite, the swing that takes place when any force reaches its maximum extension and cannot hold. The darkness that had been excluded returns. The thing denied becomes the thing that breaks through. In every individual life lived through such a moment, the same logic applies. The old self, the one built on certainties that have stopped working, on roles that have lost their meaning, on a story about the future that can no longer be believed, must end before the new one can begin. And the inner life will use whatever imagery is available to communicate this. If the available imagery is global catastrophe, it will use that. If it is a dream of rising water in your childhood bedroom, it will use that. The message is the same. Something is over. Not the world. An age, your age. The question then is what you do with this knowledge. Not the knowledge in the abstract, but the knowledge in the moment when you catch yourself reaching for the collapse thread again, or when the dream of flooding cities wakes you at 4 in the morning, or when the news cycle fills you not with ordinary dread, but with that specific, strange attentiveness, as if the screen is telling you something you need to hear. The first move is to turn toward it rather than away from it, but to turn with a particular question. Not, is this going to happen? Not, how do I prepare for it? But what in my own life does this correspond to? What in my own circumstances has the same shape as what I'm looking at out there? The same sense of something irreversible in motion, the same grief that hasn't fully landed, the same structure that held me for years and has now quietly stopped working. This is not a comfortable question. It asks you to trade the vast impersonal drama for the smaller, more specific, more painful one. It asks you to bring the projector home. Pah! For the person whose career has been dissolving, not dramatically but slowly, the way the meaning drains out of something before the thing itself fails, the question might look like this. What have I been building my sense of self on that I can no longer honestly believe will hold? Not the job, necessarily. The identity, the story. I am the person who does this, who is recognized for this, who matters in this specific way. That story may be ending. The floods in the dream are that story's ending. The collapsing institution in the news is that story, seen at a distance where it is finally bearable to look at. For the person who has ended a long relationship and found themselves strangely unable to stop consuming disaster content, the logic is the same. What they are mourning is not just the relationship. It is the future they had organized around it. A future has ended, an age has ended, and the inner life, trying to find imagery adequate to the scale of that ending, has reached for the biggest thing available. The second move is to pay attention to what arises alongside the fear. Because the inner life does not only generate imagery of collapse, it also, simultaneously and without fanfare, begins to generate something else, the ancient symbol of wholeness, the circle with a center, the shape that appears whenever the deeper organizing intelligence starts working to pull scattered pieces back together. This is the mandala, the most fundamental image of integration the inner life possesses, a form that surfaces in art and in dreams, and in the round objects people began seeing in the sky over cities when the age felt most broken. It is the inner life's answer to its own question. Here is what wholeness looks like. Not here is wholeness, but here is its shape. A compass bearing. A direction. What that symbol means practically is this. Beneath the fear of collapse, beneath the projection of inner chaos onto outer catastrophe, something in you is already reaching toward a new form. The deeper organizing center, not the everyday self that plans and worries, but the intelligence beneath it that has always been steering toward completeness, does not give up when the old structures fail. It pivots. It begins gathering the materials of what will come next, even before the old form has fully ended. The third move, and the hardest, is to participate consciously in that gathering. The New Jerusalem, the new inner world, is not built by waiting for the outer world to resolve itself, or by surviving long enough for the crisis to pass. It is built by taking what survives the collapse of the old certainties, the values that held even when the roles failed, the capacities that remained even when the identity dissolved, and beginning deliberately to shape something new from them. This is not a project with a completion date. It is a process of slow reconstruction from the inside, carried out in the middle of the same world that is still visibly breaking down around you. The world will not stop being precarious. The news will not stop being dark, but the apocalyptic content will begin to lose its grip on you. Not all at once, but progressively, as you find the inner equivalent of what it was pointing at and begin to work with that directly. The projector is still running, but you are learning to recognize what it is showing you. Every generation has stood at what felt like the final edge. Every generation has been right about something ending and wrong about something ending forever. The Roman Empire fell, and in the rubble of its falling, something new was already swimming upward from the dark. The medieval certainties dissolved, and in their place, something else began to be built, by people who could not yet see its shape but could feel the pull of it. The pattern is older than any single civilization's memory of itself. What makes our moment feel different is not that the stakes are higher. They have always felt ultimate to the people living them. What makes it feel different is that the old containers for this kind of fear, the religious frameworks, the collective stories that once held the end of the world imagery and gave it a meaning that could be carried, have mostly been dismantled. We are left with the fear and without the vessel. The inner life, trying to find somewhere to put the immensity of what it is sensing, reaches for whatever is available. And what is available constantly and in exhausting detail is the imagery of civilizational failure. But the fear is not the problem. The fear is a communication. It is reporting something real. It is the inner life's way of saying something has run its course, something has reached its limit. The age of a certain way of being, certain certainties, certain structures, a certain story about who you are and what the future holds, is over. And that is true, and that deserves grief. And that grief, when it is finally allowed to be what it is, rather than projected outward onto the screen of global catastrophe, begins to clear the space for something different. The fish swimming through the dark water does not know that what looks like the wall of the aquarium, the boundary of the whole world, is actually the surface. The light coming through looks the same on both sides. The water feels the same. But the moment of breaking through, the moment an age ends and another stirs in the dark below it, is already happening. Beneath the fear, beneath the collapse, beneath the grief, that has not yet found its name. The fear of the end of the world is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It may be the first sign that something in you is finally ready to end, and that behind the ending, something is already beginning to move.